All right, welcome to today's Cannabis Oversight Committee meeting. Can we get a roll call?
Yes, sir. Chairperson Ali Jamalia.
Present.
Vice Chairperson Adam Hayes.
Present.
C10 is currently unfilled. C11 Apollo Wallace is absent today. C12 Kari Donaldson.
Present.
C13 David Nogales Talley.
Present.
Seat 14 Shay Gilmore.
Present.
Seat 15 is currently unfilled, and Antoinette is currently absent. Mohammed Mali, or representative from the Department of Public Health, is absent. Lieutenant Lang, or representative from SFPD, is also informed me in advance that she's on vacation. Stephen Kwok, or representative from DBI. Thank you, sir. Matthew Chandler, a representative from SF Planning.
Present.
Corey Pock, a representative from SFUSD, is not here. Dylan Rice, or a rep from the San Francisco Entertainment Commission.
Present.
Thank you, Dylan. And then Victor Wong, or a rep from SFFD, I believe is online. Captain Sai is representing the fire department.
Present.
With 5 of 9 voting members present, we have quorum, and we are ready to begin the meeting.
Thank you. That concludes item number 1. Moving on to item number 2. Secretary, if you could read out the land acknowledgements, please.
Yes, sir, real quick, I just have some opening remarks. Please pay attention to the public comment instructions as they've changed slightly since our last meeting. To enable public participation, you will receive public comment for each item on today's agenda. Each speaker will be allowed up to 3 minutes unless otherwise abbreviated by the chair. And when you have 30 seconds remaining, I will indicate that your time is almost up by ringing this bell. When your allotted time is reached, I will announce that your time is up and ask the next person in the queue to speak. We will take public comment from those joining us in person first, and then we will open up the remote access lines for those joining remotely. For those calling in to submit their testimony, please call 1-415-655-0001 and then enter the access code 2505-291-5024. Please wait for the item that you are interested in speaking to and for public comment to be announced. To comment from your phone, you must enter the meeting password 937-945-69 and then press *3 to raise your hand. Once you've raised your hand, you will hear a prompt that you have raised your hand to ask a question. Please wait to speak until the host calls on you. You will receive a request to unmute when it is your turn to comment. Please press *6 to unmute and begin your public comment. These instructions will be put on screen for any folks watching remotely, just so that they can follow along. Best practices are to call from a quiet location and to please mute the volume on your computer. Once your time has elapsed, your line will be muted. These instructions will be displayed before each public comment. For those persons attending in person, please line up in front of this table when public comment for the item you would like to speak to is called. Please speak clearly and slowly, and if you care, to state your name for the record. Not yet, sorry, Brent. In a minute, guys. I appreciate the enthusiasm though. This is just the general instructions. And finally, I'll ask that we all silence our mobile devices so that they do not go off during the proceedings. Please also note that committee members are not permitted to directly respond to public comments. And now I will do the land acknowledgement as the chairperson requested. The San Francisco Cannabis Oversight Committee recognizes that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land and in accordance with their tradition, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in the traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush Ohlone community and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples.
Thank you. That concludes item number 2. Moving on to item number 3, general public comment. Anything that's not on the agenda or any general comments.
So now, if anyone has any comments that are not about specific items that we have, feel free to come on up. I'd ask you to just watch your step. There's a cord in between the tables over here. And For any members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of the table to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have two options to provide public comments at this time. The first option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code, 2505-291-5024. You may need to enter the meeting password, which is 937-945-69, and then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until you hear the prompt on your phone to unmute. That is your indication that it is your turn to comment. Please press *6 to unmute and then begin your public comment. Once your time has elapsed, you will be muted again. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is open and I will read your comments as they come in. And if you give me a brief moment, I will put these instructions on screen as well for all of our remote viewers. Okay, with the first gentleman, I would like to make public comment in person. Feel free to step up to the podium, state your name for the record if you like, and then begin your public comment. You'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Bram Goodwin. I'm the media director of the San Francisco Brownie Mary Democratic Club. I appreciate you having me. I wanted to mention, because it happened since the last time we met, we had SF Weed Week. I want to compliment a couple of especially members of your committee, which is Ollie and Adam, who really helped bring the message and really was part of the backbone. And we had the mayor, we did very well. And if you're interested, go to sfweedweek.com. There's a blog there. There's a lot of interesting statistics about it and pictures, etc. I'd also mention that from the same people who gave you Weed Week, SF Hash Week is coming, which is going to be July 10th to the 17th. Again, if you go to sfweedweek.com, you'll see the banner, you'll see all the activities, you can RSVP and see what's going on, etc. Many of us saw social media yesterday from Mayor Breed, where in this pretty bold type of picture, she said, "We are waiving all fees for outside activities and events." You know, like it's a great thing, which sounds nice. I would like to ask about cannabis. That cannabis comes to the table for these things. That we make it easier to do it. And that we are allowed to do things that alcohol can do, which I think we all would say is a higher threat to society than cannabis. So I would encourage the committee to explore the possibilities for different events and different situations that we could partner. And at a minimum, because people have asked me, who do I contact if I'm interested in this from the cannabis space? Do I contact the Office of Cannabis? Is there a mayor's office that's involved? So I'd like to, thank you.
30 seconds. You got time. 25 seconds.
Okay. Hey, sales are bad. They're down 35%. What I'd like to know is why. I'd like to hear dialogue on why. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. The next individual would like to make a public comment. Feel free to step up to the podium, state your name for the record if you like, and begin your public comment. I'll ring this bell when you have 30 seconds left.
Hello, my name is Nate Landau, the co-founder and CEO of Snowtail. We've been to many different, I haven't been to this meeting before, but I've been to many Brownie Marys, and I see a lot of members on the board. We're all small business owners. We're not making millions of dollars. We're just trying to make a good living and provide jobs for people in this community. And it's been very, very, very difficult. We took half the energy we did working on red tape and put it towards growing our business. We all have thriving businesses right now. Just asking, it's heartbreaking to constantly see small businesses come up to every meeting and now they're about to go out of business because of red tape. So there's got to be something we can do to work with the city and the state to just make a clear path forward that we can all get our annual license and not have to deal with it. So appreciate any help. I just want to thank everybody here on the board that's been very, very helpful with our situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your
Thank
comments.
you.
And Chairperson, I see no comments online, and I see no hands raised amongst our online attendees.
Great. That concludes item number 3. Moving on to review and consideration of today's agenda. Everybody will take a quick look at it. And give a motion to adopt. We will open up for public comment.
Anything from the committee?
Motion to adopt the agenda as is.
So moved.
Yes.
So moved.
All right. Do we open for public comment, please?
Okay, for any members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of this table to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you will have 2 options to provide public comment at this time. The first option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code 2505-291-5024. You may need to enter the meeting password 937-945-69. Then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until you hear a prompt on your phone to unmute. This is your indication that it is your turn to comment. Please press *6 to unmute and then begin your public comment. Once your time has elapsed, you will be muted again. I will share my screen with the instructions again for any of our remote viewers, and we will give everyone a minute or so to indicate if they would like to make a comment. If so, Chairperson, I have not seen any hands raised online, and I do not see any comments in the chat.
Thank you. That concludes public comment. Can we get a vote on the motion, please?
Yes, sir. To accept the agenda as it stands, Chairperson Ali Jamalian, how do you vote? Sir. Vice Chairperson Adam Hayes, how do you vote?
Aye.
C10 is currently unfilled. C11 Apollo Wallace is absent. C12 Jakari Donaldson, how do you vote?
Aye.
C13 David Nogales Talley, how do you vote?
Aye.
C14 Shay Gilmore, how do you vote? Aye. C15 is currently unfilled, and C16 Antoinette Mobley is absent. With 5 ayes and no nays, vote passes.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 5, review and approval of the minutes of our last meeting. My fellow members would just take a quick minute to review them, and then if we can have a motion to adopt or make any edits before the public comment. Motion to adopt as is.
So moved.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I think we do public comment before action, right?
Yes.
For any members of the public attending in person, please line up in front of my table to provide public comment. For our remote viewers, please note that you have 2 options to provide public comment at this time. The first option is to call in by phone. If you would like to use this option, please dial 1-415-655-0001, followed by this access code 2505-291-5024. You may need to enter the meeting password 937-945-69. Then press *3 when prompted to do so. You may be muted if there are others in the queue before you. If so, please wait until you hear a prompt on your phone to unmute. This is your indication that it is your turn to comment. Please press *6 to unmute and begin your public comment. Once your time has elapsed, you will be muted again. Option 2, you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is open and I will read your comments as they come in. I've had the instructions up there in this time. I do not see anyone in person who would like to comment. I see no hands raised or chats in the chat box.
Thank you. Concluding number 5, moving on to Office of Cannabis.
I need to
Oh, we need to vote first, sorry.
Sorry. And so, to accept the minutes from the meeting on 3/6/2024, Chairperson Ali Jamalian, how do you vote? Vice Chairperson Adam Hayes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 10 is currently unfilled. Seat 11, Apollo Wallace is absent. Seat 12, Perry Donaldson, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 13, David Nagos-Talley, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 14, Shay Gilmore, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 15 is currently unfilled, and Antoinette Mobley, seat 16 is currently absent with 5 ayes and 0 nays. The vote passes.
Thank you. That concludes item number 5. Moving on to item number 6. Office of Cannabis will provide a general update on their work.
Yes, I will be providing the update. I know everyone loves hearing me talk, so that's gonna continue. So we have a pretty quick update this session, just a couple items to go through. So currently, we have 61 businesses in the city that are holding permanent cannabis business permits. That is 5 more than the last time that we met in March. So we've had 5 issued since our last meeting, and I think, just as off the cuff, I think we have like 4 or 5 that are on the cusp of being issued sometime in the next month or so. So we've got some coming down the pipeline as well. All applications that have been submitted to the OOC have been picked up for processing. All newly submitted applications will begin processing immediately upon submission. We are also continuing the process of working with MCDs, medical cannabis dispensaries, and temps, holders of temporary cannabis business permits, to convert into permanent permits. We've converted 9 of these so far this year, and more have entered the final stages of the process, but we are continuing to urge any owners or anyone who works at a high level at a medical cannabis dispensary or a temporary business, if you are still working with the OOC to transition to a permanent permit, please be responsive to the OOC's request for information. Please be responsive to other city departments that are reaching out to you for inspections or for any type of paperwork.
Scott, if I may just add
Yes.
one other piece to that. In an effort to ensure that everyone's aware of this deadline that is coming at the end of the year, we've issued shot blocks, both for the MCD businesses as well as temp businesses. We've made very clear that the spirit of those shot blocks is not to actually lead any applications out, but to identify the ones that are interested in moving forward. That has been successful, and we are sort of parsing out those that submitted an application many years ago and have no interest moving forward versus those that actually do. So we're seeing movement, but to Scott's point, it is very important that if you are an MCD operator or temp operator, hearing this, that you respond to the OOC's request for information. There's about 6 months before the calendar year expires, and at that point, we will not, as things presently stand, be able to issue any temporary permits to continue to stay in operation. We started these notifications back in November of last year to ensure that everyone was aware of this. And we're working very hard. We've actually had orchestrated days here at the permit center to try and streamline folks that are getting those converted. We're looking to do the same on the temp side as well. That's been a coordinated effort with this building, with DBI, with planning. So everything we can do, we are trying, but we really do need responsiveness from all the operators out there, because there is about 6 months for the latter part of the year at this point. And the last thing we want to see is businesses having to quit if they're serious about getting it.
Yes, yeah, I can speak from a personal capacity that I process these applications, that as the months go by, it will get harder and harder to get the business transition before the end of the year if folks don't get started. So please be responsive. In the grants world, grants distribution for the most recent grant round is already underway. Recipients have been submitting expenses for reimbursement, and they have been working with our office to ensure that all forms, receipts, and necessary documentation is properly submitted. The current term is set to end in the middle of July, and that is when the OOC will have more information about whether or not there will be redistribution after the end of the initial term. And that will depend on the spend down of the current round of disbursements that have been occurring. And just as a reminder, it's a little shy of, I think, $60,000 per recipient is around where we settled with the grant funds from that most recent round.
mind if I could break for a second? Just to give a little bit of a plug for our grants team, they are working very hard to make sure that funding request forms are being turned around, same with advancements, but even sort of taking one step back, we've seen that as more and more grant cycles have been distributed over the last few years, that the same jurisdictions are not necessarily receiving awards year in, year out. We are one of the few jurisdictions that has continuously received awards. And part of that is because of everything we do on the back end to make sure we're in compliance, but also a large part of it is reflective of the community and the grantees for being responsive. Anytime we ask for information, we're working to change processes. It's very bureaucratic in nature. So I just want to give an acknowledgement, not only to the grants team at POC, but also any grantees that we work with. Because this does not work if we don't hit our utilization rates. And that doesn't happen if we're not getting responsiveness from the grantees themselves. So just want to acknowledge that really good work.
Moving into the enforcement space, enforcement actions continue as they're flagged through public outreach, mostly through 311. They also come in through SFPD, SFTPH. We have a few other city partners that flag these to us as well. And a quick reminder from the enforcement team to all operators, which is please ensure that you are working closely with your analysts and inspectors to facilitate the timely processing of your annual renewals. The annual renewal process involves an online submission of a form with related documents and also an inspection by the OOC staff. So make sure that you're responsive to those so that you don't experience any disruptions to your ability to conduct cannabis business. Just flagging as well, we have been continually distributing information from the DCC concerning product recalls that are distributed by the DCC to our listserv. So if you've not been receiving these notices, please contact the Office of Cannabis at our general inbox, which is the Office of Cannabis at sfgov.org. Recalls contain important safety information from the DCC concerning faulty or harmful products, and operators can face fines or penalties for failures to comply with product recalls. And finally, in the legislation space, there has been no substantive cannabis legislation that's been introduced since our last meeting. So no updates in that realm.
And Scott, just one last update. Scott is right, no substantive update on the legislative end. However, there was an item that was heard earlier today. It's not substantive in the sense that it impacts any of our operations, but it was a matter of just doing some cleanup around fees for inspections that UPH may have previously conducted but no longer conduct. So if anything, it's removal of those fees and those inspections. It doesn't directly pertain to our work. Just want to flag it for anyone who might have been paying attention to the hearings that were going on this morning.
It should not affect any operators or any stakeholders in any real way. Yeah, that's it for the OSC update. Pass it back to you.
I just have a few questions for clarification. One was, in the conversion of temp licenses, one is the MCDs. They obviously all sunset at the end of the year.
Yes, yeah.
Does the same date go for all city departments, or is there other departments that have set, like fire, for example? Are they adhering to that date as well? Or is that on a case by case basis? Because
I can answer those.
Yeah.
So they're separate, right? The provisionals that we issue from our office, they are codified. And the particular sections that allow us to issue those provisionals expire at the end of this calendar year. The decisions made by individual departments, like fire, for instance, to give us the authorization we need to continue to issue those tests, that's on a more case-by-case basis. So two different timelines, but fire has been working with a lot of those impacted operators to ensure that they are making steps towards coming into compliance.
okay, but we have fire on.
They're online. Yes, yeah.
I guess my question is so, because there's obviously a lot of nuances. We know you probably know from implementing the shot clock, you're looking at finding those that really want to continue and are serious about it, and those that will most likely not continue past this year or to go get an annual license. Is fire having the same approach, looking at the individual operators and deciding if it's viable? Because I know the OOC you have a stipulation of viability, right? Is fire approaching it the same way? And this question is obviously for my fellow committee member and from the fire department, not for you guys.
Yes, Captain Sire, were you able to hear that? And if you're able to unmute and respond, feel free to chime in.
So, I'm Captain Sai. Could you rephrase? I didn't understand the question. What exactly are you asking?
My question is this, given that the temp permits are sunsetting at, the provisionals are sunsetting at the end of this year, that part of it is obviously your inspection and making sure that those operators are compliant with fire. Are you looking at the individual operators and seeing how viable it is for them to make it by the end of the year? Or have you guys set a date in fire that said by the end of October, we're shutting everyone down? I guess that's really my question.
Currently, we're working with,
No, I just made that date up. That was just an example.
so currently we're working, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Captain.
Okay, so currently we're working with the Office of Cannabis on 3 particular locations. One of them, I think, has been extended close to December. The other 2 have a shorter date. Basically, the operators need to get their DBI permits finalized. Anything related to the business has to get finalized. So the burden is not so much on fire, it's on the operators. If these DBI permits cannot get finalized, fire has nothing to do with it. We cannot get involved. I can't issue, as much as I would like to issue a permit, I can't touch it because I'm waiting for DBI. So if they don't get what's done at DBI, then fire is a moot point. Now, as far as that deadline goes, Nikesh or Ray maybe can speak for that. There are 3 operators that have been given extensions. They all are within this year. None of them are going past December 31st. And we're working with them individually. And they all have the same parameters. They all need to get their DBI permits final before fire can get involved. Traditionally, historically, when you want to look back at every situation, there hasn't been a big problem with fire permitting. It's the DBI portion that's causing the bulk of the delay here. If there is a delay on the property, we work aggressively to work with them to resolve it. That's easy. My team and the operator, we can work on that. We have no control over DBI. So this stop that OOC is talking about, that does not have to do with my department.
Okay, so my main question was if you are working with individuals, and it sounds like you are. What would an individual have to do to approach? Would they just write an email to you? Who do they contact at fire to, or does it go through the OOC to kind of have their case reviewed for viability through fire?
What viability are you speaking of? Because these operators that I'm talking about, we are in constant communication with. They already know who to talk to at fire because we have been communicating and they've been communicating with us. So as far as viability, it's really up to the operator. If the operator can accomplish the DBI permits by the end date, and I'm not talking about December 31st, I'm talking about their individual, end date, then yeah, we would be more than happy to permit them. I mean, everyone on this panel that has worked with me is familiar about how aggressive I have been in trying to buy time and help everyone permit. I am completely, believe it or not, on your side. I have risked my career. I have no problem saying this in public. I've risked my career to help you guys buy time, delay. I've shuffled things. I've done everything in my power to stall this so that you guys get what you need. Yeah.
We know it and appreciate it. I just want to make sure, because we've all, to your point, most of us on the panel have done the DBI process, which explains why the OOC did a sort of a guided DBI permit center tour. I think my main concern was how fire is approaching it, but you've definitely cleared all that up. Thank you, Captain. I appreciate it.
And Chairperson Jamali and I would just add, obviously, if there are any operators out there that have questions about their case or about just questions in general, they can always reach out to the Office of Cannabis and we'll do our best to either answer them or direct them to the people that can answer them. That's that Office of Cannabis at sfgov.org email is the best contact.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, every operator should reach out. It is on you guys to figure out the process, but as long as the fire is working with them individually, that's very reassuring. Thank you, Captain.
Well, and as a little bit of comment, fire has been in communication with all of those impacted operators that have fire requirements. They've been working with them for months now. We are down to 3 that are in sort of final stages of trying to.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions from the committee?
We can open up for public comment.
Sure thing. I will display the instructions for any remote viewers to call in and make their comment heard at this time. Please note that you can call in by phone. Please follow the instructions on screen. Press star 3 after you get through the line to indicate that you would like to make a comment, and then wait to hear the prompt to press star 6 to unmute. That will be your indication that it is your turn to comment. There is a second option where you can also submit your comments by chat. The chat box is open and I will read your comments as they come in. I'm going to provide a few seconds here for any folks online to indicate that they would like to make a comment. And Chairperson, I do not see any comments in the chat and I do not see any hands raised online.
Excellent. Then we'll close for public comment, and that concludes agenda item number 6. Moving on to item number 7. I think we all know that there's there's several operators, especially in the retail space, that are closing or are likely to close in the future. And my thinking behind this was that we should allow the Office of Cannabis to process new retail-related business applications and from existing applicants, specifically for properties that have previously held entitlements, but are currently abandoned, closed, or failed to complete. This amendment takes aim to make efficient use of already entitled properties. I think we all know how difficult that is to get done here in the city. And I don't think it goes against the previous moratorium, because those are mostly properties that were already considered in the moratorium and applications that were already considered in the moratorium. So given that those have been vetted and approved, utilizing these properties will not contradict the moratorium. I think allowing them to be reoccupied for cannabis-related business use will also help maintain the economic viability of our community. So with that, I would like to propose the following amendment. Currently, the provision reads, the Office of Cannabis shall not process any new retail-related cannabis business permit applications until December 31st, 2027. The amended provision that I'm recommending would say, notwithstanding the moratorium stated above, the OSC shall be permitted to process new retail-related cannabis business permit applications for properties that have previously been entitled but have since been abandoned, closed, or failed to complete the permitting process. Accept new applications from both new and existing applicants to occupy and operate within these previously entitled properties. Apply this rule to all license types covered under the ordinance. That would be my text that I would suggest. And with that, I would like to open the floor for discussion. And I think it's key to hear from the retail community, because I'm not a retailer. I obviously think there was a thought behind the moratorium, and I'm not trying to go against the spirit of that. But I think we all don't have any interest in empty retail storefronts in retail corridors and economic corridors that are hard to come by in the city to begin with. So that is really the thinking behind it.
When you say having completed the permitting process, at what stage would you envision?
Failed to complete, where somebody has either been evicted by a landlord because they abandoned their application, didn't have the funds to finish. Because we see a lot of that happening right now, or even stores that are getting shut down because they have CDTFA bills that they can't cover, right? I think when the moratorium was introduced, we were counting on the market to play out, but we didn't know how it would play out. And I think this is just kind of a reaction to how the market is playing out to refine the moratorium. And I don't have a legislative sponsor for it yet. So this is really just going on record, feeling out the appetite of the community. And then if the appetite is there, we can try to take it to one of the supervisors to get it sponsored.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there should definitely be an opportunity to open it up. I think that my biggest concern would obviously just come with those areas that are already heavily saturated with I guess cannabis retailers and cannabis businesses. And trying to figure out if there's a more strategic way to open up different dispensaries in locations maybe that are lacking the, I guess, the resource, right? Lacking the dispensary in the neighborhood, or that's somewhere nearby, right? Because I know that there are pockets in the city that are empty,
Right.
but there are plenty of neighborhoods that are just oversaturated. And I think that was also part of the spirit of the moratorium, is to keep the ones who are currently existing alive and afloat, right? And
And the applications.
mhm.
And
Yeah,
also
yeah, no, for sure.
applications that were in the pipeline. So this would only apply to those,
Uh-huh.
the ones that already existed when the moratorium was implemented, and the ones that have been made it past planning and are part of the current pipeline. So you wouldn't have additional ones. There would be no new dispensaries. It would be the ones that are already, you know,
I guess that's where I was
Made it
confused,
through
because I
the-
thought that that's what was already happening.
well, yeah, but there's still a lot of applicants that are not affected by the moratorium, but haven't opened yet,
Mhm.
correct? Could you guys quantify how many current retail applications are still being processed?
We'd have to look into it, but we're talking, it's gonna be,
10, 15, maybe?
more than that.
So, yeah, all of those are still going to open, or if they don't, someone else should have a chance to open that.
Right,
That's the point I'm making,
Okay.
not a new one.
okay, yeah,
New app,
so,
so yeah, it would definitely still adhere to no new business applications can be processed unless it's for an already entitled property, right? So they
gotcha.
went through planning, they did the community outreach and then couldn't open. You
Okay.
should be allowed to pick up where they left off and open
Right.
it. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, okay.
Just a, yeah, point of clarification for the committee. I think what we're discussing specifically is that, right, when it gets past the planning department, typically, and Matthew could speak to this in more detail, that's when the land use becomes vested. That land use remains.
Correct.
So even if the business does not open, that land use still remains and it creates the buffer zone. And I believe what Chairperson Jamalian is suggesting is that a new app could be submitted, but specifically only for those properties.
Given they're not buffered out by an application that was
Mhm.
already, right? So there's a lot of nuances, and that's why the way that I've worded the text is to give you the authority, OOC, which you do have the authority to for portability and other things under Article 16. So the idea is to also allow you to make a decision on a case-by-case basis if someone should be allowed to take over the title.
And in theory, this would also apply if there is a storefront that closes and the landowner does not remove the vested land use, a new application could submit at that previously closed
Right.
location.
Because we all know that entitlement process, every other industry, their entitlement is a value that's on their books. That's an actual value on people's balance sheets. So why should this entitlement, something of value that was created, not be used by another group?
And just as a point of clarification, it's not to say that new applications couldn't be submitted, it's to say that new applications for new locations can be submitted.
Sure.
Yes, correct.
Do you mind, do you have the text there in front of you?
Yeah, I could, you want me to email that to you real quick?
Sure, that works too. Yeah, just the Scott, not Dennis one, and that way I can read it into the record as well.
So what would that mean in terms of the timing for, if we're talking about like replacement operators for the premises that has the vested land use entitlement? Would they need to get, I mean, these are applicants that already have applications in the pipeline, right?
Or new app.
Or
They would
new
still
app-
have to go through the regular process of.
So then for the new applicants, what would be their deadline to like get their application
I mean, it would
in?
be an application that starts from scratch essentially.
Okay. I mean, like, because we're all, so, I mean, at the end of this, I guess I'm wondering like, what's the timing that we're looking at for these replacement operators?
Well, you think if there's a time frame, one entitlement is, I mean, if it's vested and not changed, it stays there for as long as the change of uses.
Is that a question?
Yeah, it's a question.
It really depends. So if something is non-conforming, so meaning that it legally exists but doesn't meet the current planning code requirements, or if it required conditional use authorization, then those businesses, the land use expires after 3 years of stopping operation.
Okay.
If it's principally permitted, meaning it didn't need any sort of entitlement and meets all the other planning code requirements, there is no abandonment provision.
Okay.
So that land use continues and
But aren't all dispensaries, subject to a change of use? Do we have principally permitted dispensaries?
there are some,
Oh, really?
usually like in the downtown location.
Oh, got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Or like that.
So yeah, I mean, you have a shot clock baked in by the planning
Right.
department, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And again, this is really just the conversation I wanted to have and see how the retail community acts, because they're the most affected by it. There's no moratorium on submitting a license for cultivation to an existing entitlement, so it doesn't affect manufacturing, cultivation, or distribution, but it
Right.
does affect retail, right? And you see more and more stores closing. And the portability actually was sort of the other thought is, if there's an existing applicant that can't make it happen at their location, but has the funds to go into one that someone else entitled, that makes portability on a
Yeah.
permit also quite easy.
Yeah.
But you can do that already, right?
And it would theoretically reduce build-out costs and things like that, depending on the.
Sure, but you are able to port.
Portability is possible in certain circumstances.
Sure.
It's just, it's a little bit of, not quite a case-by-case thing, it's not the right description, but someone would need. to
There's
reach
a
out
lot
to
of
us.
moving parts.
There's a lot of
Yeah,
aspects.
there's a lot of aspects. Well, that's my recommendation. So,
Any other questions or comments from the committee?
No.
If not, I will read the text again and then public comment and then vote.
fantastic.
So currently, the text of ordinance number 144 reads, a portion of it reads, "The Office of Cannabis shall not process new retail-related cannabis business permit applications until December 31st, 2027. And the proposed text from Chairperson Jamalian is, notwithstanding the moratorium stated above, the Office of Cannabis shall be permitted to process new retail-related cannabis business permit applications for properties that have been previously entitled and have since been abandoned, closed, or failed to complete the permitting process." That's one. Two, accept new applications from both new and existing applicants to occupy and operate within these previously entitled properties. And three, to apply this rule to all license types covered under the original ordinance. If we have any members of the public who are here in person who would like to comment, please feel free to line up in front of our desk at this time. For any of our remote viewers, I am putting the instructions for remote comment up on the screen as we speak. Please note that if you are calling in, you may be prompted to enter both the access code and the meeting password, and then ensure that you press *3 to raise your hand to indicate that you'd like to comment. When I unmute you, you will get the prompt to press *6. Please do so and begin your comment. The second option is that you can submit your comments by chat. The chat box is open and I will read the comments into the record as they come in. I see there's one individual here in person who would like to make a public comment. Sir, please feel free to step up to the podium, start your comment. You will have 3 minutes and I will ring this bell when you have 30 seconds left for your comments.
Thank you. I'm Graham Goodwin, Media Director, SF Brownie Mary Democratic Club. I find this discussion very interesting, and as was pointed out by Carrie, there are spots in the city that are vacant, so to speak, in terms of cannabis. And I think we've talked a lot of times about the idea of quote unquote portability. For example, I'd like to hear some discussion about it. Stores that are in congested quote unquote areas, could they relocate to one of these other spots? Could they relocate to one that is authorized, as you were pointing out, but did not open, so that the person who holds those rights could, I guess, sell them or pass them on? Because I think, as people have been talking about, that's one of the issues that we're facing, which is because of, I would call it discrimination in the past. We've been quote unquote green-lined into very congested areas. So is there a way within the law that we could work this out? Because I think it'd be, because as everybody knows, some of the stores are just hanging on. They have no place to go. especially the Article 33 one. So I would encourage the committee to come forward with something that might really work and let's lobby. You know, we're all available to lobby our supervisors if that's what it takes. So I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment.
Thank you.
I am removing the comment instructions from the screen, and Chairperson, I do not see any hands raised or any comments in the chat box online.
Thank you. With that general public comment is closed, then can we get a vote on the recommendation?
Yes, sir. Chairperson Ali Jamalian, how would you vote?
Well, I don't have a second yet, so.
Oh, sorry,
I have to
totally right.
get a second.
Sorry, I'm jumping into it. Pardon me.
I can second that.
Thank you.
There we
Now
go.
we can vote.
Yes, Chairperson Ali Jamalian, how do you vote?
Aye.
Vice Chairperson Adam Hayes, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 10 is currently unfilled. Seat 11, Apollo Wallace, is absent. Seat 12, Craig Donaldson, how do you vote?
Nay.
Okay, seat 13, David Nagawasali, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 14, Shane Gilmore, how do you vote?
Aye.
Seat 15 is currently unfilled, and seat 16, Antoinette Mobley, is absent. I believe that's 4 ayes and 1 nay, and the vote does not pass. Is that correct? I'm going to defer to our more.
Yeah, he's
senior
more
city
math,
partner.
yeah, he can do math quicker than I.
Let me think this
It needs a
over.
majority.
Yeah, I think we'll have. to-
Yeah, I think we need a majority.
I can double check with you, yeah, but I'm fairly certain it doesn't pass, but we will confer and confirm.
That is fine.
Um,
With that, we conclude item number 7, moving on to 8, probably the most exciting item today. The Office of Cannabis will give us an update on the pilot program, the pilot program extension.
yes, sir. Moment to set up here.
Yes.
There we go. Here we are. Okay. You'll be hearing more from me, and then the Director of the Office of Cannabis, Nikesh Patel, will come up and continue the presentation. We will also be joined by a representative from the City Controller's Office, and then I will close out our presentation and take some questions and discussion from the committee on what we're about to discuss today. So just here, there we go. Quick review of what we're going to talk about today. The first thing is that we're going to review some of the regulations that we've discussed in the past. This will be relatively quick, but I just want to remind all the members of the committee the previous discussions that we've had about temporary cannabis event permits. We're going to talk about looking forward, what the possibilities for an expansion of the temporary cannabis temporary cannabis event permit pilot program would look like. It's a bit of a mouthful. And then we will hear our update from the City Controller's Office, working with our city partners and some of the work that's already been done on the ground in order to, for this possible expansion. And then last, we will gauge interest from both the committee, from stakeholders that are present, and then also solicit some feedback. And then this solicitation of feedback will continue in the coming weeks and months as we continue to try to work on this possible expansion. So why don't we just dive right in with a brief summary and remind you, sort of review about some of the regulations that we've already talked about. So, right, what we're talking about today is temporary cannabis events. And the first thing to talk about is the fact that if you are operating a temporary cannabis event, you're going to need to follow a whole slew of regulations that fall under a bunch of different parties, right? So from the state level, you're looking at regulations under the Department of Cannabis Control, which is the commercial cannabis regulations. You're looking at rules under the Business and Professions Code. You're also looking at some rules from the Health and Safety Code. And just to say too, this may not be comprehensive. There may be other small rules scattered throughout state law that you would have to follow depending on the type of event that you're planning. And then on the local level, same thing applies. There might be random little tiny rules from different departments. But overall, right, the main thrust of the rules are going to be in Article 16 of the San Francisco Police Code, which is what includes the pilot program. And then we have regulations that sit underneath of a lot of our city partners. Just to name a couple, Department of Public Health, San Francisco Police Department, San Francisco Fire Department, Recreation and Parks, Office of Economic and Workforce Development, amongst others. And so on the local level, the main regulation that you would need to keep in mind or that we'll be discussing today is the pilot program provision surrounding temporary cannabis events. So this is section 1621.5K, and that requires three main things: that the event had previously been held on a regular basis, that the event in prior years had been issued a city permit, and that the event had significant unregulated cannabis sales or consumption in the past. And this pilot program is currently set to expire on December 31st, 2024. So just to give you a quick idea, right, events that would meet these types of provisions are like San Francisco Pride or the Fulton Street Fair, right? These types of big events that occurred on a regular basis. These were the type of events that were originally held underneath the pilot program that we're talking about a possible expansion of today. That's, oh, go ahead.
I think the expiration date may be incorrect here. We can double check it.
I will double check that, but yes, thank you, Director Patel. That is the main section of regulations that you would need to pay attention to on the local level. There's obviously more, but we're going to save a little time by not delving too deep into the weeds. If any viewers are interested, we've had previous discussions about this with the committee. Those recordings are available online as well as the meeting minutes. So we talked about on the local level for Article 16 specifically, you have the pilot program that you'll have to follow. On the state level, this is the first part of the state regulations that's important. There's three main steps before someone can hold a temporary cannabis event that they'll have to follow. The first is that they'll have to get a cannabis event organizer license from the state. So that is just a normal application process, and I'll defer to the Department of Cannabis Control for any specific questions about what that event organizer license application looks like. The second step would be then you would need to get a written local jurisdiction approval for your event, right? So in this example, someone goes to the state, they get their event organizer license, then they would come to us and they would say, here's my idea for the proposed event. Do I have local permission to do that? Let's say in this hypothetical example, we say, yes, that's great. That individual then would need to go back to the state and they would need to obtain a specific temporary cannabis event license for that specific event. So this overarching event organizer license will stay with the individual or stay with the company as they move forward. They will be able to host multiple temporary cannabis events, but they will need to get a temporary cannabis event license for that specific event for each specific event that they plan, right? So even if it was organized by the same people, SF Pride and Outside Lands and Folsom Street Fair, they would need individual licenses for each of those events. On top of that, there is a broad swath of state event regulations that you need to follow. Like I said, we're not going to get muddled down in the weeds here, but I'm just going to read through some of them and give you the really basic idea of what we're talking about here, right? So location restrictions, they can only be held in specific locations that are delineated in this section of the state code. Alcohol and tobacco restrictions, alcohol and tobacco can't be sold at cannabis events. There needs to be adequate security for the event. They need to be able to filter and do ID checks. There needs to be a designated retail section and a designated consumption section that are separated. Public visibility will need to be obscured. You'll need to have local retail licenses there. If you're selling cannabis, you'll need to have local distribution licenses there to move the cannabis from the retail locations to the event and back. You'll need to have secured storage for all of that retail, right? So, I mean, this is just some of what we're talking about, and these are honestly like the most burdensome state regulations that apply, but there are a whole host of other regulations that event organizers will need to follow for each cannabis event. And then if we're looking forward, right, at the future of cannabis events, so that's just a very brief overview of what you're going to need to do. But looking forward, what are the practical effects of the state regulations on events moving forward? And this we've all talked about as a committee in the past too, but just some reminders, right? The main takeaway on a lot of these state regulations is that it's very cost prohibitive for event organizers, especially smaller or medium-sized events. And really, the main areas where this cost comes into play is on fencing and visibility coverage. That tends to be what the event organizers are telling us is one of the biggest, if not the biggest cost most of the time. And then the second is almost always the security personnel. So having to have adequate security to cover the event space. Those are usually two of the biggest areas of expense for event organizers. It's also a very time intensive process, right? So for the state license, for the state organizer license, that can be submitted at any time, as far as I'm aware. For the specific event license, like the event specific to SF Pride, let's say, that needs to be submitted at least 2 months in advance. And then you'll need to work with the state to make sure that it meets all of those, checks all the boxes that the state has, let's say. So right off the bat, you're looking at a minimum of a 2-month runway for your event, if not longer, depending on the other logistics, right? And so overall, the state regulations, they're going to favor large outdoor events that are already backed by a significant funder. So in my mind, the perfect example is Outside Lands, right? It's already a gigantic event, already has a lot of money behind it. So it's a lot easier for a big event organizer like that to integrate something like grasslands into the event than it is for smaller event organizers as far as the state regulations are currently written. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Director Patel, who's going to talk to us a little bit about possibilities with expanding the pilot program. So
Thank you, Scott. All right, before I start, anyone have any questions? Because that was a lot. And I know everyone here has heard it a couple times, but it's still a lot. So take a break, questions. All right, so then I'll go ahead and get started. The reason why it was so important for Scott to explain some of where we've been is because as we think about what the future looks like, we are trying to avoid recreating a framework that exacerbates or at least perpetuates some of the problems that we've already identified for the larger outdoor events. So as we thought about what could a possible expansion look like, and this is still very much in the early discussion phase, the purpose of today's meeting is to really get a type of say, okay, we've done a lot of work behind the scenes to see what might be feasible within the existing framework. You'll hear from the Controller's Office, the City Performance Team in particular, about a lot of good work that they've done reaching out to other city departments. But right now, we just want to take a break and say, what do you even think about what we're proposing? So I'm going to get into it now. There were some key goals that we wanted to balance. One was that we're learning from lessons from the past, and primarily that we're not creating a process that is cost prohibitive, time intensive, and ultimately limits access. So that was the second key goal of ours, is how do we create a framework that is more accessible, and not just accessible to event organizers, but also cannabis businesses and venues that exist within San Francisco already. And then the final piece here was how do we do all of this within the existing parameters of the state and local framework that already exists. It's a lot to try and manage into the existing framework. But the last thing we want to do is propose something that is not going to work, right? That runs afoul of the laws. And then as a result, ultimately dies before it even gets started. So these are the three goals that we thought, how do we create something that will allow us to achieve all of this? And where we landed right now is shifting from outdoor events to indoor locations. So the proposal to expand the pilot program is to eligible indoor locations across San Francisco. And this would include places like art studios, comedy theaters, clubs. Right? That is what we're thinking at this point. Now it comes with a lot of caveats, and that's what we'll get to in a minute. But I do want to spend a little bit of time just fleshing out what the possible expansion looks like in practice. So who can apply? Any holder of a state event organizer license. That is the requirement that comes from the state. If you want to apply for a temporary cannabis event from our office, as well as the equivalent at the state level, you have to have a state event organizer license. Unless that changes, that's a prereq. Then that event organizer would also be in partnership with venues that have acquired certain permits that are needed in the city to host events in general. So these would not be additional permits that we're saying, hey, go out of your way to get this. These are the permits that you would need if you want to host an event in an indoor location anywhere in the city. We're trying to create something that's streamlined as well. So if that's factored into the program, then it's one less set of permits that you have to acquire separately. It might be a part of the process, but we want to make it very clear up front. And now, what is it for? The permit would be to sell all cannabis products, and the consumption piece would be for only non-smokable cannabis products. The reason for that is quite simple. There are rules in the city that prohibit smoking indoors. We've done some good work with the DPH and gotten some clarity around are there waivers available. Waivers exist for outdoor locations. There are no waivers that exist for indoor locations to smoke cannabis. So if you are a location, for instance, that is a hybrid, indoor seating area, outdoor patio, you cannot lawfully actually smoke on that patio. There is no waiver that allows you to do that with cannabis. So I just want to throw that out.
Would have to be a fully outdoor location,
It would have
no
to be a
indoor
fully outdoor
attached to it.
location that would have a waiver. There's no waiver that presently exists
Okay.
to allow for smoking in patio. So if it's happening, it's not happening within the bounds of what the city permits. And then how would you do this? You would do it through an application process to be implemented by the OC. This is another area that we've already started looking into, and it's a part of the conversations we've had with other city departments. How do we create a process that's more integrated and gives people the information they need upfront to determine whether they can meet all the requirements, what the process looks like, and something that's ultimately transparent. So with all of that, you might be wondering, why this kind of expansion? There are obviously other scenarios we can think through, but why did we land on indoor locations and the parameters that we discussed? There are a lot of good reasons for this. And the first one is that we believe that this proposal is the furthest reaching and most innovative given all of the constraints that presently exist. If it's an indoor location, and you heard Scott talk about some of where the drivers and expenses come from for outdoor locations, if it's an indoor location, you don't have to have the same number of security. You don't have to create an enclosed structure, which means your fencing costs go down, and then you don't have to cover it either. So your meshing, your fencing, and your security costs are already built into the location, and they all come down. The other area that we saw a lot of time being spent was on identifying a viable location. If you're going to have an outdoor event, you have to have a location where the consumption is obscured from public view. Okay, how do we address that? If it's indoor, then you don't have that problem. So the question of viability becomes much less in an involved process that requires a lot of city departments being involved to figure out, okay, is this viable, is this not? So just from that standpoint alone, we think that this is the furthest reaching given the present constraints. We also think it's presently feasible at the city level. And the reason we feel more confident about that is because we've had internal conversations with the city performance team we talked about. But this is manageable given present constraints. And the biggest one is city is facing budget deficit and budgets are being cut. And so we're trying to create something that's actually feasible and can get off the ground. This we think can, provided that it happens in a phased out process and we have the cooperation and responsiveness from the industry as well. But before we even do that, that's why we're here. We're just trying to get a sense of, is this something people are even interested in? Does this appeal to cannabis businesses? Does it appeal to event organizers? Does it appeal to existing venue locations in San Francisco? We also think that this model will increase the frequency of events and expand eligible locations across San Francisco. What we're trying to do over time is identify the locations in San Francisco that are interested in this. The best way to do that is to open up a process, let people come forward and determine for themselves if they can get through the regulations, if they can pay the cost. It will, when we do roll this out, whatever it is, it will be in an experimental fashion and it will be in a phased fashion. So it won't be everything all at once, but we'll try and build off of what we're learning step by step. It also pairs cannabis with existing entertainment in San Francisco. And what we've heard in a lot of our conversations is that traffic into San Francisco is good for all businesses, including cannabis businesses. We also think that this kind of model will increase exposure and opportunities for existing cannabis businesses. The reality is that if you are a brick and mortar location, you are bound to your geographic location. If there are more events that are happening across San Francisco, you're working with the event organizer to sell your product at those locations, now you are a little bit more mobile. You are going into spaces that have built-in foot traffic and audiences. So we think that this might be a win for the industry itself, especially at times where we hear sales are down. We also think it's more cost-effective for event organizers. What we've heard from event organizers in the space today is it's very expensive. And a lot of it is in sponsorship fees and in setting up the actual physical structure, covering it, having the security personnel. We think this cuts down some of those costs. And then we also think that this is a great way to test out what further expansion of the city might look like for larger indoor locations further down the line. That wouldn't be a part of this phase, it would be much later down the line. But that makes sense. We're trying to gather information to see if this model works at a more scalable level. And then finally, if the city regulations do change, then we think that this poises us to be in a position to adapt more quickly, because we've already contemplated what an indoor scheme could look like. So with all that being said, there are still ongoing constraints, and some of them have already been mentioned in what I've said so far. The indoor smoking piece is still one. The regulation around when applications have to be submitted, there is a state deadline of 2 months in advance. I think when you think about how to administer a program like this, you have to bake that in. So if you do want to have an event, you have to get the application in at least 2 months in advance to the state. So that nimbleness that you might hope for in a indoor scheme like this, it's a little bit hamstrung by the fact that you have to submit applications a certain time in advance. Right?
I think, if I may interrupt, the state is right now at 75 to 80 days to process them. So you really have to get them in 90 days, and that's according to their own stats that they
And
published
is that for,
for events. Right? Yeah, that's the fastest one with 85 days. That's the
No, it's a good
quickest
point to
one.
clarify.
But that's just what they published in their
Yeah.
own legislative
Yeah.
report.
Like
So,
officially, you have to submit
I
in 2
mean,
months.
again, I think this is a good pragmatic start because an indoor location is easier to secure 3 months ahead than a park. So, yeah.
we just think that this might be easier to administer, but I did want to flag it because it means that if you're interested in having an event and you come up with this idea a month before the event,
Not happening.
it won't work.
It's not happening. If you don't come up 3 months ahead of time, you're cutting it tight, right?
That's right.
That's like realistically, not you guys, but the state. So.
And that's something that we'll have to think through. If
Yeah.
there is appetite for this and it is a expansion that we move forward with, then what does the scheme actually look like to identify which events are happening? How early do they have to advance? How early do they have to inform the office that they're interested? What's the selection process? There are staffing constraints here, right? But
Sure.
the last thing we want to do is set up a program that accepts all these applications up front, and then we don't have the bandwidth to actually permit. So there will be a process if we get to that point. Right now, we're just talking about, what do you think of this idea?
Has there been any consideration of Assemblymember Haney's 1775?
Yes, and best case scenario is it may make the question of how can consumption lounge operators participate in these types of events that we're talking about moot. If it passes, then it's conceivable that consumption lounge operators will be able to host events, charge an entrance fee, and allow smoking on site without meeting one of our temporary cannabis event permits. If it does not pass, we're in conversations with the state around what that might look like. And as you can imagine, anything and everything in cannabis is always a little complicated. So the answer is not clear. It is that the consumption lounge operator cannot lease out their space. So they would not be able to work with an event organizer and lease out their space for the event, which raises the question, might they be able to apply for a temporary cannabis event permit? But then that defies a little bit of common sense as well, because if
They have a lounge, they can do whatever they want.
That's right. So, it's a very good question, but I think it's to be told. We very much thought about that. Consumption lounges are really, they have the best of all worlds here, where they can charge for events. They actually have the equipment and have been approved by DEA to allow for smoking indoors as well. So, we're monitoring the situation, but we thought about it for sure.
Just building off that really quick for our viewers, I think everyone here already knows, but obviously any state legal action, legislative action would almost certainly need to be followed by city legislative action as well. So we would see some sort of a.
And listen to the good point. Now, one of the bigger constraints right now, and I want to flag this very much up front. We have tried our very best to identify what is actually feasible. We feel pretty good about most of what we're putting forward. What we don't feel confident about right now is the part of this process that is driven by the state. So we have a sense that the state will permit or issue temporary cannabis event licenses to certain kinds of indoor locations. We are still waiting to understand what that looks like for bars and restaurants. Bars and restaurants are a little bit more complicated. There's food that's being prepared in one setting. There's alcohol that's being sold in another setting. There are provisions to temporarily suspend your liquor license, but whether the DCC will issue a temporary cannabis event license to a venue like a bar or a restaurant, that's still to be told. We're having those active conversations, but as many of you know, the DCC is very much busy with permitting right now, and it's a question that's been put on the back burner. So realistically, I'm not sure we'll have that clarity before we reach a point where we might be implementing some of what we're talking about today. So the point I really want to make here is that for bars and restaurants, this might be a sort of you apply and then you see if it works kind of situation. And the last thing we want to do is encourage anyone to apply under the false premise or idea that a permit would be guaranteed. At this point, we do not know for bars and restaurants.
So
They'll be
this,
finding out with us.
so, because I mean, you know, I'm more of a smoking fan, so too, I always say that the events where you only consume and eat, whatever. But I do think there's value here, because if we can actually do infused dinners and things like that, San Francisco was for a minute taking the lead on that culturally. Now it's kind of shifting to LA, but that's a good pragmatic way to try to introduce something like that. And usually that a lot of the dinners, they serve, you know, edibles purchased at stores, or they refine it at the end with something, with a tincture or something. So it wouldn't even really be preparing in terms of manufacturing, right? It would really just be a delivery mechanism of consumption. So I think that might actually have some legs in the city. And this would allow smaller setting, 20 people dinner. And they're not usually at restaurants anyway. So these are usually venues that host these. So I think there's a small portion of the event organizers that could really benefit from sort of the first foot in the door approach, which is what this is, right?
Right, and I'll speak to that in a second.
And because you said, patios under the rules would not be allowed currently, what about, indoor space with a roof? That same thing?
Pretty much the same thing.
Okay.
So these are, at this point, I think the safest thing to do is to say yes, that those would not be allowed under this framework, because you need a waiver to actually smoke
Oh, yeah.
in an indoor outdoor location.
Okay.
And right now, that is not available. Plus, the added issue that I think you run into with an outdoor location like a rooftop is it depends where it is. Because if it's still visible from public view,
Right.
then that could interfere with the state issuing that license in the first place. But to remember Jamalian's point, I think that what you're suggesting, that's the type of feedback we're looking for, because we would have to have a conversation with DPH and our other city partners to see what rules are even implicated when there's food being prepared on site versus food that's slightly being adjusted versus prepackaged items. Right? In the vision that we're conceiving, if a bar was to sell cannabis, what it might look like, if that was even possible, would be a vendor coming in compliance with all of the local and state provisions, and selling that product as if they were selling it anywhere else, right? Not necessarily in the context of a used product. Now, this is the feedback we're looking for. We can always have conversations about what that actually looks like, but I just wanted to throw that out there, that in the restaurant setting, this would look more like what we've seen at other events, where a vendor is invited to sell their product. There's a regular operation of the restaurant, and then if someone wants to purchase cannabis to consume side by side with their meal, they would have that option. There'd be a vendor. That's what we're presently trying to get clarity from the DCC about. To my point earlier, we have not gotten that clarity, and so if a bar or a club or a restaurant was to apply under this framework, there would be very much a wait and see approach. Because if the DCC doesn't issue their state license, then it doesn't matter if we issue a local permit. Okay. What has already been done? I think you're all tired of me talking at this point, so I'm about to turn it over to the controller's office, city performance team. They have done a lot of work behind the scenes, and we are very lucky to have their support. There is no way that the Office of Cannabis can gather the information, have the conversation, schedule the call, stay on people for the information that's being requested, and organize it in such an efficient and easy way to digest. We didn't have their support. So I just want to acknowledge it front and center, and I'll let them speak in a moment. Like you can see here, they've done a lot of work reaching out to other city departments and even getting us to a point where we can have this conversation publicly. So everything we're presenting, it has been communicated with other city departments, and we feel confident this is possible. But now I'm gonna turn it over to them and let them share their good work. And what? Just, there we go.
Hello, everybody. I'm Hannah Johannes today. I've been working on this project with my colleague Janice Levy. We're part of the Controller's Office, City Department team. And so what we do is work with departments on project basis to help them do analyses and project management. So exactly what Nikesh was alluding to. That's what we do with departments across the city. So together, we have been performing quite a few functions for this project. We've researched and analyzed existing event venues in San Francisco. We've had interviews with other city departments that currently work on cannabis event permitting to note their perspectives and ideas on how to expand the pilot program. And we've outlined some program options for OOC to consider, so that way they develop a very streamlined application. So as Nikesh had also flagged, we've interviewed 7 different departments, and they've all contributed great reminders on how to structure the new application to reduce the burden on applicants and the departments that will review these applications. They also flag differences between application processes for indoor and outdoor events. So we've organized those interview findings into 3 different themes. So permit processing, application, and interdepartmental collaboration takeaways. And so for permit processing takeaways, that informed what permits should approve and for how long. So considering permits for weekend-long events or multiple days instead of just one day. Application takeaways provided input on what should be included in the application itself. So, for example, requiring a security plan for crowd control as folks enter the event. And interdepartmental collaboration takeaways focus on how OOC and other city departments will work together to approve these event applications. So, for example, site visits are going to be necessary for these venues. So we've been working closely with OOC to provide project management and analytical support. So for what other city permits do applicants need to host a successful event? We really took away from our interviews conversations about what types of permits are going to be necessary. And I'll get into that in more detail shortly. We'll put a pin in that for now. For potential application eligibility criteria, so we're considering what factors should and should not be part of the application process to make sure that people applying for OOC's events have as straightforward as process as possible. And so, as Nikesh also said, balancing some constraints. So balancing event permit volume with city processing constraints. So we want to make sure that OOC can work with all of the applicants as closely as possible to make sure that the events go off without a hitch. So that means we need to consider OOC's staff time and other factors and balance the reviewing and approving of event permits with the volume of incoming applications. So creating applicant support systems. So not only is OOC working to create a really streamlined applicant-focused application for this type of event permit, they're also looking at creating different resources like checklists of the types of permits that may be needed to host this event, and also having links on their website to those permits to help people navigate how to host their event. We're also working on shaping the application process with OOC, and so that's really looking at how all the other departments are going to have to collaborate with OOC to have the application approved. So getting into some of the permits, we came across a few location-specific permits that are essential to hosting events in San Francisco. So we have the place of assembly permit, And that's when a venue's maximum is 50 or more folks, and that's issued by the fire department. And then there's the place of entertainment permit, which is needed to host indoor events of live entertainment. So that's bands, it's fashion show, it's DJs, and that's issued by the Entertainment Commission. And so those two permits are permanent permits, which means that venues would not need to apply for individual permits to host an event. They already have them, they can host events. We also found the one-time indoor entertainment event permit, which is needed to host an indoor event with live entertainment. And venues that don't have that permanent place of entertainment permit can apply for that temporary permit to host their event. And that's also issued by the Entertainment Commission. So as we continue to progress in this work, we're going to start reaching out to stakeholders. So we have potential applicants representing here to hear your feedback. And we're going to continue to work together with OOC to help develop this process and provide some thoughts for them to consider as they package their final permit together. So if there are no other questions, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Anything for city performance at the moment?
Thank you.
All right. So diving back in, right, next steps for the OOC, very similar to the next steps for city performance. And thank you again to our partners over at the Controller's Office for all the work that they've already done on this project, and I'm sure we'll continue to do to facilitate it moving forward. So we'll obviously continue working with our city partners, like the Controller's Office, working with our state partners like the DCC, trying to make sure that all parties are having the same conversation, right? We're also internalizing all the information that the Controller's Office has already gathered and kind of trying to integrate that, like Hannah mentioned, into our process already. And then, right, this is the portion that we're at now as well. We're gathering recommendations from stakeholders. So that's members of this committee, that's members of the public that have come to comment tonight, that's other members that might be watching online. Also, feel free to submit your comments to us by email. We'll make sure to put that up on the screen in a little bit here. And so just to guide that stakeholder feedback, right? So we want to hear, is there support for this type of an initiative? Is there even interest in this type of an initiative from operators, from consumers, from other stakeholders? What do you like about this idea? What are you concerned about? What do you dislike about this idea? Are there specific indoor venues that folks are, thinking off the cuff would appeal to this type of a system? I think we've talked about like concert venues or art studios. Is there other places that folks can think about? And then is there any other kind of feedback that folks have, obviously taking into consideration all of the constraints that we've discussed with state law as it currently stands? And we'd like that to kind of guide the feedback, but obviously we're welcome to hear anything that folks have on their minds about this type of an expansion right now. I'm going to put the contact information up here for a few minutes while we talk about some of this feedback, but I'll flip back to that other slide in just a moment so that we can guide some of our discussion as we move forward. So with that, I will open it up first to committee members to have a brief discussion. Any questions? I think really what we should do is questions or clarifications about the information that's presented, then public comment, then back for like actual substantive discussion about what a recommendation would look like. Go ahead, Mr.
You
Rice.
mind if I jump in before we get
Floor is open.
Please, yeah.
It's gonna help,
You have a lot of input here.
So first of all, thank you, Hannah, for doing all that work and
Thank you.
meeting everyone. That's great. So, another opportunity. So obviously the place entertainment permit is one of our permanent permits for entertainment, but we also have one called a limited live performance permit. And that's typically for smaller venues like a restaurant or a bar or a gallery space where the entertainment is incidental to their use. It's like a secondary use. So just want to make sure that people are remembering that's another tool for this world of the permanent entertainment permits. And then I also want to just clarify that, we are really regulating the entertainment activity, song and dance, bands, DJs, theater, karaoke, poetry recitation. So like if you are having an event at on premises that doesn't have any of our entertainment activity, we don't need to get involved. So if you have streaming music from Spotify or Pandora or whatever, you know, you have a TV set or film screening, it's indoors, there's no entertainer. We don't get involved. Just want to sort of, so you can see that there is some flexibility there. We obviously want you to hire artists, you know, we encourage that, but just so you're, you know, if your vision is to just want to have ambient, you know, Spotify music playing, like, we don't get involved.
The DJ would already, then, if it's a DJ and an MC, that would go under that.
Correct, that is considered to be entertainment.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Mr. Rice from the Entertainment Commission. I'll leave the contact info up here for another couple minutes. Any questions from any committee members about stuff that's presented, clarifications, things that you'd like us to expand upon a little bit before we go to public comments?
Question?
Pretty
Comments?
precise,
I think
pretty
it's great.
precise.
I mean, I think anytime we can open up locations to more cannabis business and then also drive business in the city, that's fantastic. So,
Go hand in hand.
thank you.
You do have to go by what the state does. So
Oh, yeah.
it sounds like this, you guys
Yeah.
have really identified that very narrow window of where you can start. And we know the state's gonna move a little slower on this. It's not a huge priority for them at the moment. It's a pretty good start. I think it'll encourage some smaller events to at least give it a shot, which is ultimately what we're trying to achieve.
What's the timeline for this?
Good question. Also, I was able to get clarification. My apologies. I'm waiting for the slide deck together. It's January 1st, 2027 is when the pilot program is set to expire. We, as a committee, made a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors months ago to make that adjustment. And so that it's currently 2027 when the pilot program expires. And then, sorry, the timeline specifically on like rolling out a change such as this?
Thought I can,
Yeah, please.
so.
This does it require legislative change or that we have the authority of the OC to do this?
It would require legislation.
Okay.
Depending on what is ultimately put forth. But if it's this, what we're talking about now, then yes, that would require legislation.
Okay.
City legislative.
Yes, right, yeah. And just to even add on to that timeline, right, I think I can speak for the office when I say that this is like the beginning of a discussion about this. You know, we can make a really hard line recommendation out of the committee today with specific language and everything, or we can make a spiritual recommendation, let's say, and continue to craft the specific language, find legislative partner, all that kind of stuff, right? This is the beginning of a long runway that will be required to make these changes.
Yeah, I think we can just add it to a future agenda and really get feedback from the community. You don't just have to word a placeholder, really do it. That's
Well, I think what might inform how the committee proceeds to discuss this is a little bit of a timeline of how we foresee this rolling out. So best case scenario, sometime early next year, right? That's best case scenario. Now, there are a lot of steps between now and then. And so I want to be optimistic always, but I think being realistic is also important. So it could be, you know, this time next year where this is actually getting off the ground. But the steps that would be required, at least that we've ascertained right now, one, we need to do a little bit more focused group research, not just on the cannabis side, but also on the entertainment side, and then on the event organizer side. Is there an appetite for this? Right? Then the next step would be, depending on what those conversations and where those conversations lead, finding a legislative sponsor and getting something drafted that meets the spirit of what we're talking about, but is not overly expansive, that then creates some unintended consequences for the office and for the city. Because I think that could be a deterrent to a fruitful expansion over time. And then after that, and everyone here knows the legislative process can take some time, especially towards the end of the year. So whenever that actually goes through, then there's the question of how do we roll this out in a way that is fair and equitable, that gives everyone an opportunity to look at the calendar and say, I'd like to have an event and propose an application, and then gives us an opportunity to take all of that information and then determine, hey, these are the events that we think we can move forward with. This is exceeding our capacity, and sort of roll this out in a really thoughtful way. So we know what the year or whatever the ensuing timeline and docket of events actually looks like before we even get started. So it's not something that we have just sort of put together in the moment. We've thought about this, and really the thinking is that we want to be thoughtful. We think it'll take a little bit of time. Best case, sometime early next year. More likely, sometime this time next year, maybe even more than that.
I don't think, I mean, probably not before the election, not gonna see any legislative
Yeah.
movement on this thing, so we have some time to refine it. I really do think we should get more input from small event organizers. We know a lot of them around town.
yeah.
And that's ultimately the demographic that we're trying to get out and come and grab from it, so.
And the next step, what may happen is you may hear from Hannah, Janice, because they will be leading a lot of these focus groups. And what's really important to us as we build this out is the quality of the information we're receiving. And if there are already folks that you have in mind that might be interested in this, we'd love to hear from them. So it's very likely that you'll hear from the city performance team, but just like.
Yeah, reach out.
And we'll make sure to distribute comms through our normal channels, through our listserv and things like that as well.
And I would also recommend that, these meetings are really good platforms to hear from the public. The attendance really varies, and I think if we know that we're going to agendize this in the future, then there should really be a robust effort, not just on our end. We set out the distribution notices regularly, but even members here, any contacts you may have, come to this meeting because it is your opportunity to give feedback on whether you think this is a good time and good resource. I think it's whether it's a good way to spend all of our time, really.
Agreed, absolutely.
We have limited resources and we're trying to do this right.
Yeah, it's not, we don't get some application, you don't do it for 2 or 3 applications.
That's right.
That's right.
And all of this is barring any other legislative change that might occur. I know Haney's bill was briefly brought up, like, I mean, you know, a year from now, we could be looking at a different landscape. It's just gonna depend.
Yeah, I think like identifying the low hanging fruit with event organizers, that should really be the priority. From venues to the type of events that really, like, you guys are already obviously trying to do that.
This is great. I'm really impressed with the office and the controller's office.
Yeah.
Really. And
Yeah,
collaborative, yeah.
I think with that, we can open up for public comment. Any questions?
All right. It's here. Just. Okay. I'm going to begin explain our online instruction for public comment for our remote viewers now. So if you are watching online, please wait for those instructions to appear on your screen. Please be reminded that if you're attempting to call in, you may need to enter both the access code and the meeting password. You will need to press *3 to indicate that you would like to make a comment. That will raise your hand and show me that you would like to comment. Please then wait until you hear the prompt to press *6. That is your indication that it is your turn to comment, and *6 will unmute you so that you can begin your comment. Once your time has elapsed, you will be muted again. The second option for our online attendees is that you can submit your comments in the chat box, which is open, and I will read your comments into the record as they come in. If there are any individuals here in person who would like to make a comment, feel free to line up over here, and we will take those comments first. Please be reminded you will have 3 minutes to make your comment. I will ring this bell when we have 30 seconds left. Feel free to step up to the podium, sir. Feel free to state your name for the record if you like, and then begin your public comments.
Nate Landau. I first want to start with other venues and wellness, yoga studios and meditation studios in another place. I don't know if it's feasible in the regulations, but even physical therapy can benefit from it. I recommend for research. Colorado doesn't allow sales, but Colorado has bring your own. We have it through all these different venues, so pretty good resource. And my question is that I understand of smoking, but what about vaping? And there's 2 kinds of vaping: there's vaping flower and volcano, and there's vaping concentrate. So would that fall under smoking? Would that fall under not smoking products? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Feel free to step up to the podium, state your name for the record if you like, and begin your public comment. I'll ring this bell when you have 30 seconds left.
Graham Goodwin, Media Director, San Francisco Brownie Mary Democratic Club. Well, first of all, I just want to compliment the Office of Cannabis and the Controller's Office. People ask me, what does the Controller's Office do? Now, I got something. Besides those dry reports, I got something. No, I think it's impressive. A couple of items. and it ties in, we've discussed the possibility of having a wellness fair at the San Francisco County Fairgrounds, if anybody knows the building at 9th and Lincoln. Incredible building. And I just would also like to ask what procedures for using city buildings such as this for a wellness thing. The other thing I have to bring it up, the elephant in the room. Look at our product selection. Most of it, or a very high percentage, is smokable. Come on, we have to confront this sooner or later, which is there's a number of studies out everywhere that indicates cannabis smoke is not toxic. Now, I'm not a doctor, I'm not professing to be a scientist, but if we don't explore this, we're just, not, because most of the event people are not gonna put up any kind of money unless they can attract people like me. We're willing to come and willing to spend money on 75% of our products. Is there a way that we can open a dialogue? And I've asked for this a million times, with our San Francisco Public Health, with the state, because without that, and I love what you guys are doing, but nobody's gonna show up. The economics are not gonna be there unless the Nate brought up the vaping or the other possibilities. We need a task force on this specific issue. Because guess what? Got 30 seconds to say this. Right as we stand here, as I'm standing here, there's people smoking inside indoor stuff. So do we want to make it legal, or do we just want to let them go out and do it on the streets? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I am removing the call instructions from the screen. Chairperson, I do not see any hands raised online, and I do not see any comments in the chat box for public comment.
Thank you. That concludes item number 8. Moving on to item number 9.
Sorry, public comment for item number 8. If there's any motion or anything from the committee, we can consider that now.
Yeah, just question for the chair. This expansion, we're talking about putting it on the agenda for next.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, that's all
I think it should be, either on the next one or the one following one.
To take like a vote on some type of an
Yeah.
official version
Yeah.
of an expansion.
I think we can conclude item number 8.
Sure.
and
Yeah.
Make that part of item number 9.
Yes.
And just a question head on to the committee, because the elephant in the room that was addressed, that's something we're very well aware of as well, right? And there's a lot of time and energy that's been going rolling something like this out. What do you think the appetite for something like this would be if it's a sale of all products, but consumption of just the ingestions?
Well, I think we have to take a month to feel that appetite out. I can tell you just from SF Weed Week findings that dispensary owners were very open to selling their product outside of their brick and mortar. And that part of your concept is very appealing. I think it's the event part to Bram's point, but also not just about the smoking and the inhalables issue. You can take an edible anywhere. No one will see it. There's no enforcement on edibles. It's impossible. So is it really time well spent on something that people can do at any movie theater, any nightclub where they already go? That's sort of what I'm trying to figure out. And from the event organizers that I know, their appetite for this would be rather low. But that's because my microcosm is heavy combustion. So when you talk to other people, they're, that do more edibles and infused dinners and things like that, those are mostly like traveling chefs, some restaurant owners that do it at private events. They're not going to suspend their license. They'll do it on a Monday when it's closed. So the question is, are you creating a lot of potential bureaucracy around something that's not going to be utilized? So I think the most valuable part of it is for dispensary owners to have sales offsite. That's the one thing that will then also drive a lot of brand sales for equity brand, equity operators and non-equity operators.
Any other comments from the community?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely gonna push, like you recommended, for attendance at the next meeting so that we can really get the feedback that we're all talking about there.
Yeah, and to Ollie's point, I do want to say like, I think my kind of concern is like, okay, if you guys are putting this energy and the resources towards this, how much does that? Eventually, I'm assuming or I'm hoping that combustible events are going to be a thing. And so how like, is this going to delay that from happening, or does it actually open the doors? You know, because you guys are spending so much time and energy towards this. And then the other part of it is, if we are gonna release something like this, as he was saying, it's there may not be a heavy appetite for it, but for the people that it does attract, is there a way to curate this more towards the better service like local cannabis businesses, local brands? Maybe they sell products that are only created locally here, like things like that. So I think that's another kind of concern.
Great flags. I will note, just as a reminder, right, our event regulations do currently require, if you're going to retail cannabis, that you're partnered with local retailers. There's a certain number requirement based on the size of the event. But that's certainly a good flag for us to take into consideration. And then in terms of the smoking or combustible consumption, a lot of that is going to be dictated by state and local laws around smoking,
But
right?
the idea is to start the dialogue with this, so it's doable. That, I mean, it's, yeah, I don't think the OSC is against combustibles. The
Right.
problem is we have health regulations, we have zoning regulations, you know, that.
And, sorry,
We need
if
to
you
get
can provide a
waivers.
little bit clarity around what you meant around combustible events, that'll help us sort of react to what you're saying as well. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you mean by eventually, or hopefully that'll happen. What do you mean?
Yeah, just being able to have events in smoking lounges or just like separate locations, whether indoor or outdoor, where you can vape, smoke flower, stuff like that.
On the
We've been
patio.
creating a waiver from the public health department. I mean, we are allowed to consume our medication everywhere. If you have a medical card, they don't tell you not to smoke your medication. So I think there's a lot of contradictory regulations in this space, so those need to be addressed as well, right? And there should be a waiver for cannabis smoke only. There's nothing, I mean, even the mayor said we don't enforce it on Hippie Hill, so clearly it's not really a big issue. It's just a matter of having a waiver that you guys can then reference.
Right, there's a waiver for him, but I think to you.
Oh, so there is.
There is.
It's good to know.
For outdoor locations, right?
Outdoor locations,
Right,
but-
that's like you said, that's an area that has not been explored, and
Right.
right now there's a pretty white line. I suspect that it's tied very closely with the general prohibition against smoking and things. That's not just cannabis, it's tobacco as well. So that's a separate conversation, but at least in terms of what you're saying on consumption lounges, I think there is more movement there, and we're still seeking clarity from the state where if the present legislation does not pass, what are the options for existing consumption lounge operators to host events where smoking is permissible? Because in those instances, those businesses have gone through great lengths to get the right HVAC system. They are approved by DPH. That's why there's no concern, right? Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
Any other comments, anything from the committee?
I really want to encourage everyone to contact your legislators in the California legislature. Please pass 1775 like they did last year. Governor Newsom vetoed it last year because he felt like those smoking regulations really weren't addressed adequately in that legislation. I want to point out for everyone, it's public knowledge that the UFCW or UCFW has become a co-sponsor now with Assemblymember Haney to address those concerns that Governor Newsom raised last year. So there is no reason not to support this legislation. Please call your legislators.
Very much.
Future agenda items? I think, obviously, event permitting, the expansion of the pilot program will be on there. If there are any other suggestions, right now is the time.
I would say delivery and figuring out more ways to make it easy to open up delivery for retailers. And also, I don't know what the process necessarily would be, but like, what about opening up, you being able to deliver like on a bicycle or in some type of like transporter or something like that?
They have state
So-
regs, but we'll definitely take a look.
And we could certainly talk a little bit about what the regulations are and
Right.
provide some clarity around that.
If you don't have any other suggestions, we can open up for public comment. Please.
I'm not seeing any other comments coming in from the committee.
Can I make just one point that might be helpful?
Yes,
It seems like, at least right now, one of the primary items for the next agenda would be events. It'll take a little bit of time to actually do the focus groups, get that information synthesized, and have a meaningful report back to the committee. So I just want to throw this in, it's a part of the consideration. The next meeting may not meet the regular cadence of 6 weeks, maybe it's a little bit longer.
Good.
Okay.
So I think the point is to promote the community to
Yeah.
come out to that event and maybe even help you identify some of those focus
It
group
just may be a
members that
longer
you need to
period
find.
between this meeting and the next.
Yeah. or if there is a reason to
Well-
meet sooner, 10 events.
We're not the quickest moving community sometimes. So It's take it. It's a good time.
The bike is okay. Alrighty. I will be putting the public comment instructions on screen for all of our remote viewers. Please feel free to follow those instructions and be reminded that you may need to input both the webinar number and the webinar password if you do call in. You will also need to press *3 to raise your hand if you would like to make a public comment. The other option, if you're following online, is to put your public comment into the chat box, and then I will read your public comment into the record. If there are any individuals, person who would like to make public comment at this time, please feel free to line up over here in front of the table. Seeing some possibility, right? We've got our perennial commenter coming up. And we'll take those comments first. So feel free to head straight to the podium, and I will ring this bell when you have 30 seconds left.
Graham Goodwin, Ronnie Mary Democratic Club. I just want to encourage people out there watching on YouTube to follow what Shay just said, which is please come down to the next meeting in person if you can, but certainly online also, and we need more dialogue from everybody. I just want to encourage people to be part of this process. We're talking about a lot of what I would call somewhat contentious issues. And it takes us, the activists, the citizens, to stand up and act and give our opinion. And I know for a lot of people, the politics thing, if you want to call it that, is not their favorite thing, and their cynicism, but the reality is, if we want to move this thing to a place where medical patients especially are taken care of, which they're not right now, it takes us to stand up and talk about it. We give our input to the Office of Cannabis controllers, the city, everything. Be part of the solution of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
I'm removing the instructions from online. I do not see anyone else in person who would like to make a comment, and I do not have any chat in the chat box or hands raised online.
Thank you. That concludes item number 9 and meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.